We have an incredible 9 people here out of 85 that registered. So I think the rest are just coming in mass in moments. Everyone wants to be just like a few cool minutes late. They don't want to like walk around the block because they got there early, I guess. Hey, Serafina.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Fashionably late is what we call it.
I guess because I'm not ever fashionably late, I don't even know what it's called. I'm always uncomfortably early.
Same, honestly.
A friend told me the other day that he got somewhere early and then walked around the block, and I was like, oh my God, I'm not the only person who does that.
Yeah, I'll drive around the block an extra time.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah. Just make it look like you were never there or you were there right on time.
hmm
Teach me how to be this way.
I wish I could. I wish I could teach myself to not be this way, but these things, they're just the way they are.
I feel like it's by like setting alarms, though. I set so many alarms throughout the day.
Yeah, that is not my lifestyle. That would give me intense anxiety.
Yeah. I'll be like, oop, in 5 minutes, I have something.
Okay, looks like we have a good amount of people here. So I'm going to kick us off. Welcome everyone to FOIA Friday, where I guarantee you will find strategies and tricks and tips and inspiration to file better FOIA requests and get your hands on the docs that you're looking for. I'm Dillon Bergin, MuckRock's data reporter, and I'm joined today by Elizabeth Clemons, the research director at Sunlight Search. It's been about 2 or 3 months that Elizabeth and I have been working closely together, and she is awesome and is going to be the exact right guide for you all today to get into the weeds of personal financial disclosures for political candidates. I'm going to go over the normal housekeeping and meeting notes in a second, but before I do, Elizabeth, do you want to say anything more about yourself or Sunlight Search?
Yeah, I'm director of research at Sunlight and I have background in investigative research. And I have exciting stuff to share from Sunlight, but I can share that later too when we're chatting about personal finances.
Cool. All right. So I put this in the notes or in the chat, but I will drop these notes in the chat again. Um, this is our normal housekeeping and notes doc that we have for every FOIA Friday. So if you've been here before, you probably recognize it. At the top here, we have a link to our session feedback and question form. If you want us to answer your questions, as some of which I'm going to answer today from previous feedback, put them in the form. Tell us what you're interested in or what you want us to do better. We also have the Slack channel where you can ask questions and hopefully we can answer them in real time, or other people, some of which are on this call, will hop in the conversation and answer there as well. You can also find all our previous FOIA Fridays on YouTube. Here at the top, we have the roll call. If you want, you can write your name there just to let us know who's on the call, and write a little bit about what you're interested in, just in case there's overlap with other folks on the call who you may want to talk to in our Slack channel or in the chat or wherever else. This is me, I'm Dillon Bergin. I am actually going to show you our FOIA Friday landing page, which we now have. It is just a place where I'm going to start keeping all the things associated with this call. So you have an RSVP link for our next meeting. I'm going to start putting at least a few meetings on the docket each time I update this. So if you just want to sign up for multiple meetings in advance, you can go ahead and do that. So you're always in the loop. I've attached some requests we've talked about in the last few calls as well. So if you're thinking like, oh, on that call, we talked about this request that Dillon filed, where does it live? You should be able to find it here now. and some columns that my colleague Kelly has written based on the topics of these calls. So you can find all that in the landing page now, as well as, again, that feedback form to let us know what you're interested in that we're not covering. What else? So you may have noticed by now that this is not a webinar, this is a meeting, and you can see everyone else in gallery view and not just Elizabeth and I. We're switching it back to a meeting. I'm hoping that other folks on the call can join in a little bit more easily since it's a meeting and it can just be kind of a little bit more relaxed of a conversation. Although today Elizabeth has a lot of good presenting for you all. You can unmute yourself, but I would recommend that you do not unmute yourself unless you want to be muted pretty promptly by me during that presentation. But afterwards, we'll have some more time to talk. And yeah, we have a FOIA in the news feature for this week that I'm going to walk through after Elizabeth's presentation. I want to talk to you all about military personnel files. You probably have noticed that the military history of our vice presidential picks has been in the news recently, and I filed for the personnel files of both these picks. Before you get too excited, I have not had success on those requests or other requests for military personnel files, which I'm going to talk about in a section called So You Didn't Get the Records, where I'm just going to cover the FOIA roadblock strategies that you often hear when you are in some sort of general presentation or maybe talking to a colleague about what to do when you don't get the records. But I'm going to go through the process of what I've been doing just so you can see those in practice, because I know sometimes it's just like a little bit boring and maybe hard to understand how to put each of these into your project or into your request process without seeing it how someone else like really concretely confronts roadblocks and tries to get around them. So I will be talking through that again after Elizabeth's presentation. Here we have the topic of the week that Elizabeth is going to cover, backgrounding candidate by digging into their personal financial disclosures and business interests. And then what else do we have on here? We have our links and resources. Elizabeth's going to talk about these sunlight resources at the top. And we have a space for more questions if you want to leave us questions during the call. And of course, all our notes and recordings from our last meetings. If we have time at the end of the call, we'll open up for some general questions. And I think, yeah, some workshop questions that I got through the feedback form since our last call. But we will see how things look time-wise. So I am going to stop sharing with that and pass it to Elizabeth.
Awesome. I will start sharing. One sec. Okay, great. So hi everyone, I'm Elizabeth again. Just to give a little bit more background on Sunlight Search for any of you who aren't familiar with us, we're a nonpartisan organization and we're really working on like accountability research on candidates. And so we have a couple of different things that are a big focus, but one of them is doing these trainings. And so this is kind of a teaser for our trainings that we provide. And we have a 5-session training series where we go over things like backgrounding basics, personal finances, campaign finance, educational history, professional history, and more than that. So, you know, if you like this and we give you some good materials, definitely don't hesitate to apply for these trainings. But so we have the trainings, and then we also have a research help desk that we just set up and we're really excited about. So if you all need any help with research right now, we're focusing on like election related research. But after the election, you know, we're going to want to be focusing on things like the politicians that we elected, are they doing what they said that they would do, and holding them accountable. And then other research topics we're interested in as well. So the links for both of those applications are in that document, and those applications are really short and easy. But the eligibility requirements for both of those are that you're a nonprofit newsroom or a for-profit newsroom with less than 5 million in revenue. Also have to be nonpartisan too. But yeah, so that's a little bit about Sunlight. And we can get started with personal finances training today. And if you have any questions, yeah, don't hesitate to throw them in the chat. And then Dillon, just let me know. Cool. Okay, So let's talk about finding PFDs. So one of the first steps in understanding a candidate's personal finances is analyzing their personal financial disclosure, or PFD. And first we have to think about, who has to file those. And that's most people in public office are required to file PFDs. These include members of Congress, candidates for federal office, senior congressional staff, nominees for the executive branch positions, cabinet members, the vice president and president, and Supreme Court justices. But keep in mind too, that all of these different PFDs are different and look different. So there are these different links here to find like House, Senate, White House, or OGE is where a lot of the other executive branch members have to file their personal financial disclosures. But I'm going to walk through just searching the House one really quick. So this is for the House, it's the House clerk. For the Senate, it's EFD search. And both of these links are, or all of these links are on the sheet that Dillon is sharing with you. You go to search. And so here you can see there are different tabs for members and for candidates. You always want to search both, because keep in mind, if an individual is currently a member, at one point they were a candidate. So let's search for De La Cruz, Texas. And so we can see here, let's go to for candidate one from 2020. And then you can see here, it's always helpful to look at the period covered. There are different requirements for these different financial disclosures. Like when you're a first-time candidate, oftentimes you have to file a personal financial disclosure that covers the 2 years prior, versus once you're a member, you're filing for the year prior. Let me go back here. So this was looking at candidates, and then we can search members, and we're going to look at De La Cruz again. And then we can see, here's a financial disclosure in 2023. And you see how this is different. It doesn't show you the period that's covered in the financial disclosure. Let's go back. So that's like an example of how to find, a House PFD. And as I mentioned, on the Senate's EFD search. And yet again, when we have our trainings at Sunlight, we'll go into all of this in way more detail. But one thing I want to point out with these is that it's really important to read the instructions to understand, like what rules and what deadlines the candidate has to hit to file these different financial disclosures. And so that's something that's like really important for us to think about, because we want to be thinking about if they're violating anything there. And so as we're going through this, we're constantly going to like reference back to like the rules and the deadlines. But if you are looking at a candidate and are having a hard time understanding their PFDs, don't ever hesitate to reach out to us, and we would love to help you. So that's the federal level. And then at the state level, financial disclosures, those really depend. You can find those on the secretaries of state or the ethics committees, or you might have to call. The rules and requirements for state level financial disclosures differ state to state, and what's required to be disclosed differs state to state. And I've had different experiences looking for these where, I've had to call Michigan, for example, couldn't find any personal financial disclosure of a candidate from a couple of years ago. In Michigan, they just enacted a law in 2024 that requires candidates at the state level to submit personal financial disclosures. So that's something to keep in mind. There are some states that don't require you to submit a PFD. And then there are other states too that just make it hard to find. Like I was looking for a candidate's PFD in Texas from 2014, and I couldn't find it online. And so when I called, and then they were able to email it to me. So essentially my advice for state level ones is that if you can't find it quickly online, call the Secretary of State and get advice as to like where it's located and where to find it. I also want to mention too that right now we're putting together a whole database of the links for the 50 different states of where to access state level personal financial disclosures if they're accessible in that state online. And that is something that would be available if you sign up for our training. And so that's going to be on our website. Through when you sign up for the training, you get access to a lot of the different materials for conducting research like this. So sign up for our training and look out for that. And then I also want to talk about looking at PFDs. So this slide in particular is pertinent to house PFDs. But I want to talk about the different schedules you can look for and see, and then kind of like what they include and what you should expect to see and what you might not see, which is like fine according to the rules. In this 2023 instruction guide, it is included in the tip sheet that Dillon has put together. And so, yeah, basically, Schedule A includes assets and unearned income. I'm going to pull up Susie Lee's personal financial disclosure to like show some examples. And so you can see here, there's some different subtrusts with different assets listed underneath that. Another thing that needs to be included in assets and unearned income, other than like investments, are properties, whether that's like a home or a car or a boat, anything that's used to be rented out as like a form of income. And so what you'll see in assets and unearned income are rentals, but you would never see, unless they filled it out incorrectly, you would never see a personal property or a vacation home. So this is something that's always good to keep in mind as you're trying to understand a candidate's personal finances, is that the candidate could own, say, 8 different homes that they never rent out, but that's not included in their personal financial disclosure in understanding kind of what their financial background is. And then let me go to page 13 on here. Here's where we see Schedule B, it's transactions. This is where the candidate has to report every purchase, sale, or exchange transaction that involves any of the Schedule A assets owned by them, by their spouse, or dependent children. And this is when the amount of the transaction exceeds $1,000. So yet again, you know, if we're talking about personal property versus rental property, this would include any money coming from selling a rental property, but it would not include any money coming from the sale of a personal property or like a personal vacation home. And then let me go to page 23. This is where we have earned income on Susie Lee's personal financial disclosure. She does not disclose anything, which totally can be honest and accurate. But candidates in this schedule are required to disclose earned income and honoraria if they aggregated to $200 or more from a single source. And earned income is only referring to income and employment outside of the House of Representatives. And so in this case, yeah, we can see that Lee disclosed 0 additional income. So basically, if she received any money for like speaking somewhere or a book deal, for example, that needs to be disclosed in the schedule. And so she would have improperly filled this out. I'm not saying she improperly filled it out, but like, for example, that would show a red flag of her not accurately filling it out. And then if we scroll a little bit further down, we can see Schedule D, liabilities. So this is the candidate has to report any debts owed by them, their spouse, or their dependent children that are more than $10,000 during the reporting period. And so I want to point out too, so this can show that during the reporting period, the amount of liability was $15,000 to $50,000, so huge range. However, the candidate could have paid that down. So like their debt at the current moment could be 0 for this, but during the reporting period, it was between 15 and 50,000, which is kind of confusing. And another thing I want to point out too, yet again, going back to the personal property versus the investment property, this includes mortgages for investment properties, but it does not include mortgages for personal properties. Now let's go to Schedule E, positions. So these include any non-federal positions, whether they're compensated or not, that the candidate holds with different organizations. Here we can see that Lee is disclosing that she's a trustee of the Lee Family Foundation. I'm going to walk through in a second, kind of like looking more into that and what information we can find there. And then we have Schedule G, gifts. So House members are very limited from accepting gifts, and they're required to report any gifts received during this reporting period from a single donor, other than a relative, that total more than $480. And that was the rule in 2023. And so the minimal value in 2023 was $480, and it changes every single year. However, any single gift valued at less than $192 in 2023 doesn't need to be counted against the 480 reporting threshold. So for example, if like a member and the member's spouse, received $250 from the same donor, that would need to be reported in these gifts, or $250 in two different like installments from the same donor, that would need to be reported here. But then I want to show you an interesting example actually. So candidates and members can file a gift disclosure waiver request, which we can see here. Kevin Kiley filed for his wedding. And so any gift specifically on September 14th of 2023, he did not need to disclose, which was the day of his wedding. And yeah, that's like a way different candidates can get around it. And as you can see, there are like different reasons that you can click for like having a gift waiver request, like death in the family, birth, adoption of a child, or you can fill in the blank. And then Schedule J is, let me go back here. Schedule J is the last one I want to talk about. H and I, and same with F, are a little bit less commonly seen, but Schedule J is, yeah, compensation in excess of $5,000 paid by one source. And so this is mandatory for new members and candidates to file. So that's why we don't even see it listed on Susie Lee's personal financial disclosure. But it's essentially if the individual like personally performed services for clients that generated fees for their employer in excess of $5,000, those clients need to be identified in this schedule. And so, for example, what this means is like if the candidate is a partner of a law or a lobbying firm, they have to disclose the clients or customers of their firm to whom they personally provided services that generated fees more than $500,000. But so you'll see that for new candidates and members. And okay, so things that we want to look for when we're analyzing personal finance for PFDs. We want to look at claimed business connections. And this is really helpful to look at, because we can see personal financial disclosure is like self-reported. And so we can see where there's self-reporting connection to, and then we can compare that with things like LexisNexis and LinkedIn, for example. And we can see if there are any like discrepancies there, like what pops up in their PFD that didn't pop up elsewhere. And they're like, what are they not disclosing in their PFD, for example, that they have, or that there's like a clear link on LexisNexis or a different proprietary database, for example. So let's look at Susie Lee again. She said here on her personal financial disclosure that she's a trustee of the Lee Family Foundation. In most cases, charitable organizations, they are required to file annual reports or 990s with the IRS. So I'm just going to show briefly. So this is the tax exempt organization search on the IRS. And I'm going to search the Lee Family Foundation to try to find more information on it. Yet again, this is something that we go into way more detail in our training series. But if we scroll down here, we can see the Suzanne and Daniel R. Lee. It's in Vegas. We can click on this. And then this gives us a bunch of different 990 forms over the years that we can click on and look. And so a step to understand more about this would be pulling up their 2022 990. We can see the address connected to that. And then the next step would be searching this address in the tax assessors, different property searches, and finding information on who is connected to this address. Also what this address is, like, is this a business address or is this a personal address? And so here, by looking at the assessors in Clark County, which is where Vegas is located, we could find information on this property. And by looking into it, and looking at this information, we could see that this is their personal family home where the foundation is registered to. Then also a next step would be looking at the Zillow. Different like realtor websites are really helpful to understand what the property looks like, not that helpful in this case, but what the property looks like, and then the value of the property. So here we could see that the value of the property is 3.7 million. And so to backtrack on like why this is helpful and important, is that, here we were able to identify that she's claiming connection to this foundation. And then we did some basic research to find more information on the foundation, which allowed us to find information on a personal property, not a rental property, and then see the value of that personal property, which contributes to, the personal finances and like the understanding of the personal finances of the candidate. If anyone is confused, don't hesitate to like write a comment or something, and then we can chat about it. But yeah, also looking into property records like this, we love doing it. We love looking at deeds. That is something that we go over in more detail in our trainings. So, or through our research help desk. So please, if you are confused looking at any deeds, mortgages, anything, please reach out to us and we can help you understand what's going on. Yeah, next I want to talk about totals. So at Sunlight, we've created a couple of different tools for analyzing and understanding the different PFDs. So we have House and Senate spreadsheets that are included in the doc that Dillon shared, that allow you to put the information from the PFDs into the spreadsheet so that you can get totals of their like assets, income, and liabilities. So let me pull up an example of this. And so here we can see, for example, a list of a bunch of different totals. And given on all these different PFDs, it gives you a minimum and maximum value. So it's giving you a range of the totals. It's not giving you a really specific total, but that range is really, really helpful. Even though it's massive, then we know that, the net worth of their assets are between 14.5 and almost 53 million for this candidate in particular. Another thing too is that these totals can really raise some red flags, so like, do they have a lot of money wrapped up in assets, but really low income and high liabilities? Like, what's going on there if that's the case? Or do we see something like a significant change in the totals from one year to the next? And so things like this prompt questions as we're looking at their different PFDs. And it also shows us the importance of looking at PFDs over the years. So yet again, I'm going to go back to Lee's personal financial disclosure here. We can see this is her Schedule A in 2021. As I mentioned, the minimum to maximum value of her assets were between 14.5 to almost 53 million. But then we go to 2022 and scroll down, sorry about the quick scroll, to the totals of the assets, which is, we can see it's between 8 and 24 million. So her assets nearly halved within 1 year, which leads you to ask more questions like, what's going on in the candidate's life? Why did this happen? And in this case, it was because she got divorced and lost half of her assets. But yeah, and then next, I'm just going to mention properties. I'm not going to go in detail, as I mentioned, searching for different property records, but make sure you contact us for help or for training on things like using tax assessor's office, recorders of deeds, real estate websites, and Google imaging to find more information on personal properties of a candidate. But otherwise, PFDs, if they're filled out honestly, they're really great for uncovering different assets held in things like LLCs and trusts, which are otherwise really hard to get access to. So I want to show you some examples of that. So O'Donnell was a candidate in Nevada. And here we can see listed in an LLC, West Gallery Properties LLC is a rental property in Las Vegas. And then you can see the range and the value. And essentially finding this, we hadn't identified this rental property until seeing this personal financial disclosure. And then we were able to do some further research, looking at the tax assessor's office, the recorder of deeds, to find out what this property is, and then narrow this range even more. So 1 to 5 million is a massive range, as we all know. And yeah, we were able to narrow it down more to understand the different assets that he has. And then I also want to show this one. I think is really interesting. So this is another candidate, Margarita Wilkinson, who was a candidate in Southern California. And we could see here, we were going through and we could see Prestige X70 LLC. And it was one asset that was listed. It's a vessel here. And yet again, we can see the range is 1 to 5 million. And through some further basic research, we were able to identify that this is a certain yacht, Prestige X70 yacht. And through that further research, we were able to like more narrowly understand what the value of this yacht is, which is closer to 5 million. I think it was like 4.25 million. But what's interesting is that this is listed in the assets. And so if she filled this out properly, then this means that this yacht, this $4.25 million yacht, is used as like a rental in some way or a source of income. And so, you know, next steps for finding more information on that would be looking for like yacht rental websites and then being able to identify specifically what their yacht is. And then next, I'm going to talk about contradictory investments. By looking through their different assets and their transactions, we can see things that might be contradictory to their stances on issues that they've expressed throughout their campaign. So we want to be looking for conflicts of interest. And so examples of this are like, you know, are they like anti-immigration, but they invest in companies that employ a lot of immigrants? And then that would lead you to ask for the questions like, why are you investing in this when your stance on your campaign website or in your interview was contradictory to that? Yeah, lastly, missing deadlines are great to pay attention to. So, you know, as I've mentioned, it's always good to know the instructions and the deadlines for these personal financial disclosures because they help us to understand if a candidate is violating any rules there. And keep in mind that these different deadline requirements really differ depending on the office, depending on, you know, if the candidate is a new candidate or like a member who's running again. And they even change depending on the year. So generally, you have to file a financial disclosure on or before May 15th of the calendar year, but there are a ton of caveats to that. And so it's really important to understand that and make sure if you have any questions and you're confused or anything, don't hesitate to reach out to Sunlight and we would love to help you sift through the weeds with this. And then lastly, I want to talk about kind of like how we can use PFDs and then jump off from there to determine even more different business interests and finances. So I have compiling a timeline on here. I'm not going to show you, just for the sake of time, I'm not going to show you the timeline that we have created, but at Sunlight, we have yet another template similar to the PFD template. It's a Google sheet of a timeline where we can put in all the information on a candidate over the years. And then we also have a source list tab with that as well. So we can keep track of people as they pop up in a candidate's life and different people that you can contact to get more information on different businesses that they've started or different businesses that they've been a part of, for example. But you can use things like, you know, proprietary databases, LinkedIn, open corporates, these personal financial disclosures, and Secretary of State searches in the different states that the candidate has both lived in and worked in, and to compile this timeline. So all of that information, yeah, can be like pulled together and then dumped in there in order to really organize and understand what's going on in the candidate's life and to see any discrepancies between, you know, like what they're claiming and what's actually going on, or to see any gaps in their life. Like, yeah, seeing something like, I don't know, they're claiming association with a certain business, but then you see a whole gap in like 10 years of them not working. And then you have to try to piece that together of where they were working, who they were working for, how much money they were making during that gap, for example. But for the Secretary of State, it's really helpful to note where a candidate has both lived and worked over the years and search these different databases for the name of the candidate and also the name of any listed businesses that you've seen pop up so far in your research. So it's good to search those states, but then it's always good to search states like Delaware, Florida, Nevada, and Texas. And you never know, Sometimes you'll find companies pop up, or oftentimes, I think I almost always find companies that pop up that weren't listed in LexisNexis or LinkedIn or the personal financial disclosure before. So I want to briefly walk through here. So this is the Nevada Business Portal. This is the Nevada Business Search. How I got here was just by searching on Google, like Nevada Secretary of State Business Search. And then we're going to search for Suzanne Lee, listed as an officer. Don't know if this will load. Right here. And then here again, we can click through and see different ones. She's also connected to this one. But here again, we can see the Suzanne and Daniel R. Lee Family Foundation. So, we got information on this on the IRS website, but we can also get information on this on the Nevada Business Portal as well. And then this is really helpful too, because it gives you officer information over the years and it gives you filing history, name history. So if the name of the business has changed over time, and if there have been any mergers and conversions over the years. Next, litigation is key to look at. We want to do a litigation search on the individual, their spouse, and any companies that they are involved with. And so things you want to be thinking about when you're doing the search are, have they gone bankrupt anytime recently? Have they been listed as debtors? Have they been sued? And, how does this impact their finances? And another thing that's key is thinking about any marriages or divorces. Marriages and divorces are really helpful for understanding personal finances of a candidate. And so an example that we have of this is, we were looking at a candidate who had been divorced 3 times. And so we were able to get the divorce documents from the 3 divorces. And she got a prenup going into her 3rd divorce. And then in the divorce documents from the 3rd divorce, she had a prenup going into the 3rd marriage. And then in the divorce documents from the 3rd divorce, she, or what was disclosed in there was the prenup, which detailed in a lot of detail exactly what her personal finances were at the time of the marriage, which wasn't that far before the divorce. So really helpful to comb through different litigation because you never know what information you'll get about the candidate, about their businesses, any of that. And also litigation, we do go over in a lot of detail in our different trainings. So yet again, apply for our trainings, apply for the research help desk, and we will always help you. And then there's also the SEC Edgar. I'm not going to go over this. We go over this in the training as well, but the SEC is really helpful for finding docs for, connections to companies linked to the candidate or their spouse. And you can also potentially find other companies they're connected to through this search. So, if you put in their name and then you can pop up different companies that they might be on the board of, for example. And then the last thing I want to talk about and show you are UCC filings. So these are uniform commercial code filings, and these allow you to see if any of the candidates' companies are listed as debtors or lenders for a loan. And let me pull this up. So here is UCC. This is for New York State. How I got here was looking at, I typed in UCC filings New York State, and then I got to the NYS standard debtor search. And so I'm going to search Brandon Williams, who is a candidate and member in New York. And so keep in mind, we want to be paying attention to the addresses. So this is why background research is so important, to know the different addresses connected with your candidate or individual that you're searching. And so we know that this address is connected to him. And so let's see the financing statement. And so here, it's a lot of blacked out information, but we can see here, this is what's so key about them. Let me zoom in even more. We can see collateral listed. And what I want to point out for UCC filings, they can be if you know what you're looking for, which I'll tell you what you're looking for, they can be really, really helpful. Because these are loans that you can't get access to otherwise, they're private. And sometimes when you're looking at a UCC filing, say if you scroll further, then it'll give you details on the amount of the loan, who the lender is, but oftentimes you won't see the amount of the loan. But this collateral is what's so key, because the collateral is always going to be more than what the loan is. So, say if this is pretty vague, because this just says all inventory, but oftentimes it'll list like a tractor and it'll give the model of the tractor. And then you can look up the model of that tractor, how much that is worth. And then you can know that the amount of the loan is less than that tractor. And it also is really helpful for understanding the assets of the company that you're looking into. And so keep in mind, if a company is publicly traded or a private company above a certain like net worth, that's going to be listed on the SEC and you'll have some information there. But otherwise, private companies are really hard to get information on. And so these UCC filings can tell you, it can tell you all of the things that they own. Like I think I've seen one UCC filing before where it lists the collateral and it's multiple pages in detail of specifically like what the company owns and then what they're listing as collateral for the loan. Yeah. Any questions? I know I blew through this really, really fast, but I was trying to make it fast.
Feel free to drop some questions in the chat. I have one question, I guess, to start us out. Elizabeth, you mentioned that the PFDs are especially useful most of the time, or especially useful when people are filling them out honestly. How often do you see or have you seen things missing from the PFD, or how often have you seen people not filling them out honestly, or just forgetting or misunderstanding the form? Like when someone's looking at it, should they be questioning that as if like there's a potential that something is missing, or is it few and far between that something turns up missing on the report?
It's almost always.
Well, that's really good to know. So then you should be looking at it with that in mind, that this may not be everything.
Totally. And that's why we want to do things like, okay, we're going to check other Secretary of States for other businesses, or we're going to be checking for more properties associated with the candidate. Like we want to use the PFD as like kind of like a base for our research and then jump off from there. Because yeah, I mean, almost always is something missing, but it's because the instructions for these PFDs are like 150 pages and, and they're confusing. And it's like, it's hard for anyone to understand it. And it's also hard for the candidate to understand exactly what needs to be disclosed. But it also, because they oftentimes don't fill it out properly, it means that sometimes they over disclose things that they don't need to disclose, which is also.
That's interesting. That's very interesting.
Yeah. And then you can see too, if they make a mistake and then they're caught with that mistake, they will file in, I'm not sharing anymore, but in the House clerk, you'll see, there's like a term for it, not an addendum, but you'll see like an updated or like a revised financial disclosure. And then always pay attention to the revised ones too, because those will be more up to date.
Awesome. Does anyone else have any questions for now?
Yeah, I have a question. Hi, my name's Alex. This just popped up in my head when you were discussing gifts to a congressional candidate or member of Congress. Obviously, I know that gifts to them that are reported are different than campaign contributions, which are obviously filed with the FEC.
Mm-hmm.
But I just want to understand that, I guess, a little more, kind of clarify like the different, I mean, what constitutes a personal gift versus what constitutes a campaign contribution? I mean, like, is it like you give your friend who's a candidate, $5,000, they have to disclose that, but they don't have to disclose that in their campaign fund? Like, how do you, and also how are you looking at the difference between them? Like what, if anything, should we be looking at when we're kind of examining both of those categories?
Totally. Well, I mean, so for say if a gift is $5,000, for example, which is actually above, anyways, that's like above the max amount that you can give through the FEC. But so if it's given to the campaign and it's $5,000, you're going to see that pop up on the FEC because it's going to have to go through that pathway because it's going to be given to the campaign. It's not going to be given to the individual. However, it's the same, say if like their friend gives them $5,000, like a check, just like to the individual, that has to pop up on the personal financial disclosure. But oftentimes what you see pop up on personal financial disclosures aren't monetary gifts. It's things like, oh, like a watch that's worth $500, or plane tickets, or orchestra tickets. Or yeah, there was one candidate who was gifted plane tickets to go watch an orchestra in like Budapest. And so what was included in that disclosure, it was all of the travel to get to watch this orchestra in Budapest. Does that answer your question though? Did I understand that correctly or no?
Yes, you did. It just seems like ripe for a lot of problems.
Yeah, and it's
Um,
yet again, it's confusing. And like, but keep in mind that like the gifts, that's anything given to the candidate, like the individual, versus on the FEC, that's given to the like campaign committee. And so all of that, that's being processed by like the campaign treasurer, for example.
yeah. I don't want to. I do have a question, but I don't want to hog it, so I'll shut up for now.
You can ask.
Yeah, I think you can go for it, unless anyone. Yeah, go for it.
I just had a question about candidates who are not even elected. What is the threshold for which? When do they have to file? Like, if you're, there's like, there could be like 10 congressional candidates in some primary. None of them have any shot. Minus, whatever, 2 of them. When do they have to file a disclosure?
A personal financial disclosure. So this, how I was saying the deadlines all differ, but once a candidate's campaign committee has raised over $5,000 as of this year, that amount might change next year, then that means that they're basically like a legitimate candidate, and then they have to file. And so there are different deadlines too. I don't remember this exactly, but something like paying attention to the May 15th deadline, if they raise that amount by the May 15th deadline, that means that they need to file it like immediately. But say if they raise $5,000 after the May 15th deadline, no. If they raise $5,000 before the May 15th deadline, that they have 2 weeks to file it. But then if they file, or if they raise $5,000 after the May 15th deadline, then they have to file it like immediately, like within a day of raising the $5,000. Does that make sense? So it's like, that's where kind of the campaign finance and the personal finances interact, where it's like, once the campaign has raised a certain amount, that's when the candidate is required to disclose their personal finances.
Okay, so it really is virtually, basically, I mean, any candidate's going to raise $5,000. It's not a lot of money. That's basically every candidate in a primary, or is it a primary or just general? Also, I guess it's another question. Both. Okay, so they have to. Okay, that's a lot. Okay.
But also, you will see there are a lot of candidates who don't raise that amount and who just don't have to file anything. But they aren't like serious ones that you'll see pop up in any like reporting capacity.
Any other questions? Okay. We'll have some more time at the end, which we're approaching. We only have 10 minutes left. I'm going to go back to the housekeeping notes. Share my screen. And let's see here. So I wanted to walk through this portion of solutions, strategies for when you don't get records. I'm not sure if we'll have the time for those, so I'm going to actually skip that and maybe do that next in our next session, or run through it really quickly after questions. But I'm just going to start by answering or taking a stab at some of these workshopping questions. They came in through our feedback form. I feel like they're the type of questions we get very often at MuckRock, and so they're always worth coming back to. The first question is, what resources are available to journalists who need to sue for records? For me, my first stop is always the Reporters Committee for the Free Press, or RCFP. Actually, I in these FOIA roadblock strategies, linked to their legal hotline. They're great. They answer very quickly. They give you an attorney who is excited to talk to you, happy to talk to you, and we'll work through your legal questions. And they have some great attorneys that have a lot of FOIA knowledge. So that's kind of always my first stop. I'm going to answer the next few questions and then open up these questions to the group and see if anyone else has any other ideas. So if you have other ideas for what resources are available to journalists who need to sue, or ideas for any of these questions, hold on a second, and then after I finish going through all of them, we'll open up to the group and see if anyone has any other thoughts to add. But just to go through them rapid fire, what strategies can be used to track and manage multiple FOIA requests efficiently, especially when dealing with various agencies? The easy answer to that question for me is MuckRock. That is a large part of what MuckRock does. If you're using the requests platform of MuckRock, so you can see here my requests. I have them organized by saved searches. I have active FOIAs, just things I really want to make sure I follow up on, some kind of random other saved searches, and it's really easy to take these requests, and especially if you're filing to a lot of different agencies, make sure you're marking them, or MuckRock automatically marks their status quickly so you know when to respond. You'll get notifications. You see I have a lot. And you can share them with other people on MuckRock, or you can create a link to share them if that person is not on MuckRock. So MuckRock really is kind of like an RSS feed reader in that way for your FOIA requests. Like, it's a feed where all your requests are going to be coming in, and you can organize them, mark them, respond to them, get notifications about them pretty quickly. I've seen other people just create like an email inbox that is exactly that. So you can just have your own email that you use only for filing FOIA requests, so that you can kind of condense it all into there. One other thing that I do basically all the time is have a bunch of different reminders for all my requests, so I can keep track of the different deadlines that the agency should be on. And if they said they would respond by a certain time, those dates and times. So I do this in Slack, where I have like a channel of just requests that are active and ongoing, and I'll just put like, remind me by, I don't know, we'll say September 7th, to ping the EPA if they haven't responded yet. And so I set these little reminders, because doing these kind of big managing and tracking FOIA projects, it's a little bit like herding cats. So you need to just make sure you're staying on top of things, so you can come back to the agency and make sure they're being held to their deadlines, which is the great part about FOIA. Often is that there are specific guardrails and timelines that agencies should be responding in. The last question is, what if a federal agency does not respond to multiple inquiries about a submitted FOIA, even if the FOIA was logged as received months ago? Again, this is the great part about the guardrails of FOIA, is they have specific timelines to reply. If they have not replied in those timelines, whether it's state or federal law, this type of denial, which after inquiring multiple times and checking to see what their deadlines are, this is a denial. It's called a constructive denial, and you can appeal it. So at that point, if it's months ago and they should have responded, they haven't asked for a extension in any way that would put their timeline in a different place, you can count this as a denial and just appeal the denial and say, this is a constructive denial, or I believe this is a constructive denial. Here's what happened. Here's the fact that they haven't responded yet, and treat it as a denial that you're appealing as an administrative appeal. So yeah, those are my rapid fire answers. I'm going to stop sharing and put those back to the group. Does anyone have any thoughts on any of those questions that they would like to add that would be useful for people who are journalists and are thinking about suing, or are tracking a bunch of FOIA requests in a larger project, or are dealing with constructive denial? Does anyone have any thoughts on those? This is the nice part about being a journalist. I can put my silent probe to use and just wait it out. If you do have any thoughts on those that you want to share with other folks, put them as a comment or as notes in the document. We are very close to time, so I'm not going to go through my FOIA roadblock strategies. I'll probably do that next time. But take a look, and if you have for our next call any of your own FOIA roadblock strategies to share, throw them in the doc. I think that'd be awesome, and we could talk over as a group any other strategies that folks have or that are useful. I think I will close this meeting out a few minutes early and send you all off into your holiday weekend. If you have any other questions, fill out our feedback form, let us know. Thank you everyone for coming out today. See y'all.